Whether you like your spirits cute and cuddly or cruel and cold-hearted, the 2 starting quests in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, has something to offer for you. In this video, I'll go over the 2 quests, speaking about which one you should choose, if any, as well as go over each quest in turn, looking at how you can run them, how we can use them to structure the events of Chapter 1, and also how we can use them to foreshadow and inform the players about the greater story of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. So as I just mentioned, this video will be about the 2 starting quests and how you can run them, how you can use them to structure the chapter, and how you can also use them to foreshadow the greater story of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. Before we get into all that, I want to quickly discuss whether or not you should be using a starting quest at all. The book would have you either use a starting quest or the quest in the town the party starts in. I think that's a fine idea if you have the characters starting off in a town where the quest there is actually too difficult for them, such as Dugan's Hole or Good Mead or similar towns. But I also think that you can easily both run the starting quest and the quest in the starting town if you're starting the characters off in a town such as Bryn Sander or Bremen, because these quests are easily and quickly handled, and then the characters can use the starting quest to sort of move on from the town that they started in. Now, whether or not you should use the starting quests at all is of course up to you, but I personally believe that they can add something to the game. They will add a forward momentum to the first chapter of the adventure, as the characters will have to move around 10 towns to complete the quest, which none of the other quests really have them do, as each quest is contained within its particular town. So the starting quests are more of a driving factor than any other quest described in the chapter. In addition, both of the quests are fine. I think they're decently written and described, although there are of course some modifications I'd make to them, and also ways I think we can use them to further strengthen the story and the plot, and also create a structure for the chapter, which again is what I'll cover in this video. If you are trying to choose between the 2 quests and you can't decide on which one to choose, I would suggest that you go with Cold-Hearted Killer, as it's clearly the more elaborate of the 2 and also the one that we can most easily tie to the main story. That being said, I think the Nature Spirits quest is fine, and it can also easily be a 1 or 2 town quest, so you can start them out with Nature Spirits and just have them find the Nature Spirits in the next town they get to, or the next town after that, and then they can pick up the Cold-Hearted Killer quest after having already spent some time in Icewind Dale, seeing as the Cold-Hearted Killer quest is also by far the more difficult of the 2, seeing that it has combat for a 2nd or 3rd level party, while the Nature Spirits quest doesn't feature combat at all. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at the 2 starting quests, starting with the Cold-Hearted Killer quest. Starting with the Cold-Hearted Killer quest, there's 3 things I want to cover here. First, I want to talk about how we actually run the quest, including how we can make it into more of an investigation. Second, I want to talk about how we can use the quest to make a structure for Chapter 1 10 Towns. And third, I want to talk about how we can tie the quest closer to the story and use it to foreshadow Auril and her frost roots. Alright, so running the quest. The quest can basically be divided into 3 acts. First, the characters get the quest from Llyn Trollbane, a retired bounty hunter who thinks that a man named Sefik Caldro is behind 3 murders in 10 towns. In the second act, the characters must then follow around Tork's caravan, which is where Sefik is working as a bodyguard, as it travels around 10 towns. And finally, the characters catch up with the caravan and Sefik Caldro and must do battle with him and possibly Torka, the owner of the caravan, and the caravan's other guards. First up, we need to realize that the quest is not meant for first level characters. Sefik Caldro is a quite difficult combatant, especially with his cold regeneration, so if the characters don't have easy access to fire damage, they will be in a lot of trouble. I think it's appropriate to run this quest at 2nd level at the earliest, and preferably around the 3rd level. Another issue you may have with this quest is that the Cold-Hearted Killer quest is a bit too straightforward. As presented in the book, Llyn Trollbane simply tells the characters that Sefik Caldro is behind the killings, giving only very little reasoning, such as he's probably good with a blade and he didn't seem to mind the cold, as reasons for why she thinks he's the murderer. So if you want the quest to be a bit more of a murder mystery, you can have Llyn be less confident in the identity of the killer, leaving room for the characters to do a little investigation on their own. This isn't overly difficult for you to do, and will make the eventual discovery of Sefik Caldro as the killer feel more earned to the characters. So instead of having Llyn declare Sefik Caldro the killer from the get-go, you can have her reasoning be something along the lines of: these 3 murders have 2 things in common. First, they all happened in towns where they hold sacrifices to Auril. You never know, that may have something to do with it. Second, all 3 murders happened while the merchant caravan Torks was in town. I know, because I make it a habit to keep track of where Torka Icewind, the owner of the caravan, goes. Always causing trouble, that one is. So I don't know who's behind them murders, but I'd bet my past beard it's got something to do with the lotteries and the sacrifices, and with Thorka Icewind and a thieving caravan. This leaves the characters with two options for solving the mystery. Try to find out where Thork's caravan is heading and intercept it, or go around to the towns where the murders has happened and try to figure out who's behind it. In Brynjander, we can create the NPC Telemelo, a chaotic good human commoner who is in charge of the lottery. She accepted a 10 GP bribe from the dwarf glassblower Branagh, which she then divided among the city's poorest family. If you have changed where the sacrifices are held, as we suggested in the video on the adventure's background, you can also have her be a landlord who's rented a room to the glassblower Branagh. In either case, she remembers telling a handsome blue-eyed man about the dwarf the night before Branagh was slain. In Easthaven, we make up a halfling NPC called Tig and Dapperfeet, who serves as aide to the town speaker. He kept the name of his sister, the halfling trapper Elsie Dapperfeet, out of the lottery, or took her in after she fled the lottery in Dugan's Hole if you've changed where the sacrifices are held. She was killed in his cabin, and though he didn't get a good look at the killer before he disappeared into the darkness, he will never forget those icy blue eyes. In Targos, the NPC Scath, a lawful evil tiefling veteran described on page 56, is responsible for the lottery. He openly admits to accepting a bribe from the shipbuilder Terran and urges more people to offer him bribes if you want to dodge the lottery too. He remembers telling an underdressed, blue-eyed human about Terran's bribe a day or two before the shipbuilder was killed. As the characters go around, visiting each of the towns and speaking to the various witnesses, they should be able to get a pretty good description of how the killer looks, and combined with the fact that Torque's Karen was in town for each murder, they should be able to deduce that Sefik Haltr is the killer. Obviously, this isn't a very difficult investigation, but it will still feel a lot more earned than simply having Glenn Tolbane tell them who the killer is to begin with. Now let's talk about how we can use the quest to make a structure for Chapter 1. Because besides being a fun little murder investigation, we can actually use the cold-hearted killer quest to dictate, or at least steer the characters in the direction we want them to as they go through Chapter 1 10 times. Here I'll give you an example of how that could look, assuming that the characters start out in Brynjander, but you should be able to move things around if you're starting in another town. So the first thing that I'll do is that I'll shuffle around the order of the murders. So the first murder happened in Easthaven, the second murder happened in Brynjander, and the third murder is happening in Targos. This makes for a more logical path for the caravan to have traveled, and also ensures that we'll get the characters moving northward to begin with. So after getting the quest from Hlyn Trollbane in Brynjander, it's likely that the characters will head northward to Targos, whether or not they're just trailing the caravan or they're looking to speak with witnesses, because a murder has just happened in Targos and the caravan was heading there after Brynjander. In Targos, the characters can ask around to find out that Scath is responsible for the sacrifices, and speaking with him, they can get a description of Sefik Haltr. Unfortunately, no one in Targos knows where the caravan was heading next, so the characters will have to decide between going up to Bremen or heading over to Tourmaline. Whichever way the characters go, they can then solve the quests there, maybe head around all the way up to Lonelywood and whatnot, but they'll not find a new trail on Torque's caravan. Because as the characters head back to Targos after having completed as much as we want them to in this part of 10 Towns, they'll be approached by Keegan or his dog Boy, who can then give them the mountain climb quest. There's added incentive here because Garrett, Keegan's missing husband, wasn't just heading towards Kelvin Cairn with a group of adventurers, but was also following along with Torque's caravan, which was looking to make a shortcut across the Dwarven Valley. So Keegan thinks it very likely that if the characters can find Garrett, he'll be able to tell them where Torque's caravan was headed so they can find it and Sefik Haltr. True enough, when the characters find Garrett on Kelvin's Cairn, he'll be able to tell them that Torque's caravan was heading to Cairn, which the characters can then head to next. You can then have the characters find the caravan in Cairn, or you can have them trail it for a bit longer, maybe going to Cardinaville, Easthaven, and even further. But in any event, we have gotten the characters to the southern or eastern part of 10 Towns, which is where they'll pick up on the whole Duergar affair, and where we want them to be at this stage in the adventure when they're around 3rd or 4th level. Finally, I also want to discuss how we can further intertwine the cold-hearted killer quest with the main plotline of the adventure. In the book, we only told that a frost spirit beholden to Auril has possessed Sefik Haltr after he drowned a few months back off the coast of Auril's boat. To make things a bit more concrete, we can have the spirit that possessed Sefik Haltr be the spirit of the recently deceased Frost Druid Vernus, which is the sister of Ravisen, the druid the characters can meet in Lonelywood's Elven Tomb. This way, we are tying Sefik Haltr directly to a pair of Frost Druids the characters can actually learn about and meet as they go through Chapter 1 10 Towns. In addition, we can also make it clear that Sefik was a deckhand or was traveling with the ship that also carried Naslantomir, the wizard from the Arcane Brotherhood, which we've briefly covered before. In the book, Naslantomir's ship shipwrecked off the coast of Oral's abode, so it fits the description, but Naslantomir drowned, where Sefikhalto assumedly was possessed by a frost druid spirit and then could travel to 10 towns. If you have followed our previous advice and have had Velin approach the party to have them look for Naslantomir and her missing Professor Orb, you can have Sefikhalto be in possession of an object or letter from Naslantomir, which sort of clues the characters into what has happened to Nas. This could be a pendant carrying the symbol of the Arcane Brotherhood, which Sefikhalto stole from Naslantomir before the ship was shipwrecked. Tying the stories together this way makes it so that when the characters do find Naslantomir, whether that is on Oral's abode or another place, which is something we'll get into a bit later, it'll be more of an aha moment for the characters as they can sort of connect the dots between the Frost Druid spirit, Sefikhalto, the ship that shipwrecked, and the Arcane Brotherhood. Alright, that brings us to the Nature Spirits quest, which is the other starting quest the characters can also be presented with. As before, I'll go over how you can run the quest, how we can use it to structure the chapter, and also how we can tie it closer to the story. First off, running the quest is fairly straightforward. As written, it's just about going around to each town looking for these nature spirits using an object given to the characters by the quest giver. Once the characters find the spirits, there's a small little scene that plays out, but in the end, they'll be able to just find the nature spirits sitting around playing with cutlery in the wilderness, and they can then convince one of the spirits to follow them back so they can complete the quest, where they'll also get a reward of gold or perhaps a blessing from the Twinkers. Now, there's not too much I would change about this quest, because if you're running it, you probably want it to be this sort of fairy tale minor side quest thing and not a whole big project with combat and everything. What you can do, though, is add an encounter in just right there at the end when the characters find the nature spirits to make things just a bit more exciting. This could be a pair of yetis that simply stumble upon the characters and the spirits once they find them, or perhaps the spirits are already under attack by a cold light walker or some other creature from Icewind Dale. You can also tie this encounter closer to the story by perhaps having it be Duergar the Twinkers are having an encounter with, or that stumble upon the characters when they find the Twinkers. Another member of the Arcane Brotherhood could be looking for the Twinkers and may run into the characters just as they find them. Or perhaps it's Oral's Frost Druids that are running around trying to stop these Twinkers because they're making life better in Icewind Dale and preventing Oral's spell from taking hold. Whichever way you do it, adding in a combat encounter in the end not only makes the quest a bit more challenging and maybe a bit more entertaining, it can also be used to tie to the story, which we'll also cover in a minute. Secondly, there's how we can use the nature spirits as a structure for Chapter 1. As written, you are supposed to roll a die every time the characters get to a new town to decide whether or not there's nature spirits there. You can of course fudge the dice a little bit or just straight skip the die roll and just decide when the nature spirits are present. So until the characters find the nature spirits, they'll be traveling along, looking in new towns to find the spirits, which will get them moving across 10 towns and get them to new towns continually. If you also want to give a bit of steering to where the characters go, you can have locals give rumors that may have them head in a certain direction. This could be someone in Targa saying that, I don't know about nature spirits, but there's this awakened beast up by Bremen. Maybe that has something to do with it. Or perhaps saying that there's talk of a white moose up in Lonelywood. And I don't know about Twinkers, but a white moose? That's certainly very weird. Lastly, when you want them to get to Caerconic, which again I think is a very pivotal town in 10 towns, you can have locals or rumors steer them towards that, saying that there's been theft in Caerconic, and that would certainly fit the description of what the Twinkers usually do, going around stealing things and playing around and playing pranks on people. Finally, that's how we can tie closer to the story. I think there's actually ways we can tie to all three of the main storylines, Oral and her Frost Druids, the Duergar and the Arcane Brotherhood. First off, you can have Velin be the quest giver instead of Danica, as Danica will never feature again in the adventure, while Velin will play an important part later. Having the wizard approach the characters early and ask them to find these nature spirits because she's looking for a way to end Oral's everlasting rime will get the characters involved with the main plot, ending Oral's everlasting rime, and also get them acquainted with Velin before they meet her in Chapter 3 or 4. Now, whether or not Velin really wants to end Oral's everlasting rime, or she's more interested in finding the location of Ithrin, or perhaps her missing Professor Orb, which is in possession of Naslantomir, is up to you. But just getting the characters acquainted with Velin and interested in the main plot of the adventure is a really huge boon. Second, as we discussed previously, you can also have the encounter with the Twinkers also feature a combat encounter. This could be a Cold Light Walker or a Frost Druid, which has to do with Oral, or maybe Duergar, which of course will foreshadow the Duergar and their presence in Icewind Dale. As for motivations for this, the Frost Druids may be interested in the Twinkers because they believe they are hampering their efforts to freeze over Icewind Dale using Oral's everlasting Rime, and perhaps the Duergar are interested in the Twinkers because the Twinkers have stolen some Charterlin from a location in Icewind Dale, and the Duergar is of course looking for Charterlin. Lastly, you can also use the Twinkers themselves to actually foreshadow more about the important plot. The Twinkers don't speak, but they can act out scenes and mimic stuff. So you can have them mimicking a Frost Druid going around, awakening animals, or perhaps one of the Twinkers mimics a regal lady that flies across Icewind Dale casting a spell to sort of show the characters what's going on with Oral's everlasting Rime, if that's more of a mystery for the characters. You can also have the Twinkers mimic small squat figures running around picking up stones to let the characters know about the Duergar and their search for Charterlin in Icewind Dale. That wraps up this video on the 2 starting quests in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to our patrons at patreon.com/eventyr, as well as the people who like and subscribe these videos. Your continued support really keeps me motivated to continue to make these videos. As always, you can check out all the stuff we've created for Icewind Dale, Rime of Frostmaiden if you follow the links in the description for the DMS bundle, the map pack with maps for most of the locations in Icewind Dale, as well as our articles that are available for free on eventyrgames.com. I know there's been a lot of building up to it, but in the next video we will actually be getting started with the adventure proper as we dive into the specific towns of Chapter 1, 10 towns, and going into more detail with how you can prepare and run the first chapter of Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next video.